Did the end of the Crimes of Grindelwald leave you reeling? You might say that the Crimes of Grindelwald ends with a bang. As it turns out, Credence Barebone is actually Aurelius Dumbledore. But is he really? There are more than a few issues with this mind-blowing revelation. Having finally been swayed to the side of the dark wizard Grindelwald, Credence Barebone at long last receives the information he has been desperately seeking. He is not a Lestrange, not a nameless castaway, but according to Grindelwald, Credence is really Aurelius Dumbledore, long-lost brother of Albus Dumbledore, the greatest wizard of the age. There is absolutely no foreshadowing that Albus Dumbledore had another sibling, or that he's aware Credence is related to him, which is why it seems entirely feasible that this may be a misdirection that ultimately demonstrates Grindelwald's ability for manipulation. Now, Albus makes mention of his sister Ariana, who was killed in a three-way duel between Grindelwald, Albus, and Albus's brother Aberforth. Aside from possibly being the key to stopping Grindelwald, there's no hint of a deeper connection between Credence and the Dumbledore family. Grindelwald is a master manipulator. He's a magic-wielding fascist who seeks power and the obliteration of those he deems weak and inferior, which we know in his opinion is muggles. It's a classic archetype, and anything he says besides his grand plan should be taken with a grain of salt. Grindelwald knows Credence is lost and in search of meaning, so telling Credence that he's a Dumbledore puts his power in context and gives him a target, Albus Dumbledore. Albus is Grindelwald's biggest obstacle in achieving his goal and therefore becomes his biggest target. The two powerful wizards entered a blood pact, meaning that they cannot do harm to one another, but that doesn't mean that someone like Credence can't do harm to Dumbledore. Grindelwald needs someone else to defeat Dumbledore so that he can move forward with his grand plan without anyone in his way. A young, angry wizard who's learned to control his obscurus is a perfect candidate. Not only is the dark energy a powerful adversary, but overcoming Credence would almost certainly require Albus to kill him, an outcome that Dumbledore would be against doing. So in essence, Grindelwald has chosen the one adversary that will undermine and play on Dumbledore's weaknesses. It'd be a strong, ruthless play on Grindelwald's part to push a disenfranchised youth to such ends because of his ego, but that's also the point of who Grindelwald is. He's the dark wizard of his time. Grindelwald has worked his magic on more than just Credence too, having led Queenie Goldstein to his side. These characters don't know who they're dealing with or what lies ahead. The story here is leading up to a desperate struggle between Dumbledore and Grindelwald. Even if Grindelwald isn't lying to Credence for the purpose of manipulation, there's a greater issue that points to Credence's being a Dumbledore as being highly unlikely. Dumbledore's parents both likely died before they could have possibly had another child, Credence's age. When Albus was hunting the Deathly Hallows with Grindelwald, the reason that Dumbledore was so interested in the Resurrection Stone was to bring his parents back so he'd be free of the responsibility for his sister Ariana. Since he wanted to bring both of his parents back, his father would have likely already died in Azkaban by then. The Resurrection Stone is said to bring people back from the dead, not free them from Azkaban. It is stated that Albus Dumbledore received an owl informing him of Kendra's death shortly after he left Hogwarts in mid-June 1899. Whilst no specific date can be given, we know that Percival Dumbledore died sometime after 1891 and his imprisonment in Azkaban. Credence was able to be confused for Corvus Lestrange, who was born in 1901, so it only makes sense that Credence must have also been born around that time. Dumbledore's parents would have already been dead by then. It is possible that Credence may be Albus's half-brother, depending on when Percival Dumbledore died. It's still unlikely, but it is possible. It is true that Dumbledore's parents are known to be dead by the time Credence was born, and Albus himself thought that they were both dead, but I suppose he could have always been wrong. But while we can safely accept Kendra was dead for sure, as there were witnesses and a funeral, the only thing that we know about Percival Dumbledore is that he died in Azkaban. It is totally possible in JKR's world that Percival survived and even Albus didn't know. It's not inconceivable that Percival could have somehow escaped Azkaban and had a child with another woman, who later died as a result of the sinking ship. Credence being Dumbledore's brother isn't truly confirmed yet. Grindelwald is willing to lie to people and manipulate them. This is evident with Grindelwald's approach with Queenie. He promises they'll build a world where she can marry Jacob, which we know she's desperate to do. But it's highly unlikely that that would ever be the case. Knowing Grindelwald as we do thus far, he would never allow muggles and wizards to marry one another. He would view it as completely abhorrent. He knows Credence is desperate for a family and to know his true identity after the abuse he suffered with his adoptive mother, Mary Lou Barebone. Grindelwald lays out a path so Credence will be led right to him to learn of his true identity. Grindelwald specifically wants Credence to kill Dumbledore, so there's a clear reason he'd be willing to manipulate Credence and make him hate Dumbledore. Portraying him as the brother who abandoned him would be a good way to turn him towards Grindelwald and against Dumbledore, therefore enabling Credence to be a pawn in his game against Dumbledore, and in the fight for wizard domination. There's no reason to presume that Grindelwald is telling the truth yet, without confirmation that I'm sure will be explored in upcoming Fantastic Beasts sequels. Even the Phoenix may not be what it seems. One of Grindelwald's followers could have easily put the Phoenix, whether it's real or a transfiguration, on or near Credence for him to find. Grindelwald would have known both his own plan to turn Credence to his side against Dumbledore and the legend about the Dumbledore family's Phoenix connection, so could have easily arranged to get a Phoenix. They're rare, but they're not impossible to find. There's no reason to think Grindelwald is telling the truth yet. If he really is telling the truth, it's likely to be confirmed in later movies. But for now, it's too early to think Credence is actually Dumbledore's long-lost brother. It all just seems way too convenient for Grindelwald to be true. I think the most likely explanation for Grindelwald referring to Credence as being a Dumbledore is that he was actually talking directly to the obscurus inside Credence. That may just turn out to be Albus's sister, Ariana. The idea is that Credence is brother to Dumbledore not by blood, but by his obscurus. There are theories about his obscurial having been severed from its host and attaching itself to Credence. I know it sounds bizarre, but it seems like the most plausible explanation given that Albus's parents would have been long dead by the time Credence was born. We know that an obscurus can be separated from its host and preserved. This is demonstrated in the very first film when Newt owns one and states that he successfully separated it from its host. So Ariana's obscurus could have easily been separated from her and preserved. Obscurials are rather complex, which Dumbledore refers to. Quote, "I know this, an obscurus grows in the absence of love as a dark twin, an only friend." End quote. This quote hints that an obscurus may have its own personality. It may just be revealed that Credence also has his own personified obscurus, but whether or not that's the case, we're still in the dark about that. Obscurials are young witches and wizards who suppress their magic until it turns into a dark and powerful twin of sorts. We know that Albus believes that an obscurus is like an evil twin that feeds on Credence's feelings of loneliness and loss of identity. He postulates that if Credence can find a loved one, say a family member, then perhaps he would be able to detach or dismantle the twin. Assuming Grindelwald is right and Credence is in fact related to Albus Dumbledore, this provides Credence with the family and identity he had been longing for. That being said though, I don't believe this will help Credence separate from his obscurus. If he feels that he is unloved by and fighting against his blood family, this will likely only provide further dark energy for the obscurus to feed on. What is curious about the whole situation is the following quote from Grindelwald. Quote, "Credence is the only entity alive who can kill Dumbledore." End quote. Entity is strange phrasing here. It could very well be that Grindelwald is referring to the obscurus inside Credence. If he was simply referring to Credence, he could have said the only one, not the only entity. Entity here makes it sound like a creature or monster of some sort. This theory, though, does not explain why and how Credence got his name Aurelius Dumbledore, if the surname is not Grindelwald's addition, of course. It could perhaps just be a further effort of manipulation on Grindelwald's part. After all, Aurelius could just be a more masculine attempt at Ariana's name. If the obscurus really does belong to Ariana Dumbledore, it is even more likely that Credence's dark twin will only grow while under Grindelwald's influence, primarily due to the fact that the obscurus would recognize and feed off a fight against its own family, similar to how Voldemort and Harry's wands recognizing one another due to their twin cores. So, if Credence cannot rely on familial love to free him, does that mean that he's doomed? Well, not necessarily. There was certainly a connection between Credence and Nagini at the end of Crimes of Grindelwald. Nagini even tries to convince Credence not to join Grindelwald, telling him he knows who you were born, not who you are. There is certainly a strong bond between the two. Then perhaps Nagini is the key to saving Credence. The ultimate goal for the Fantastic Beasts series is getting to Albus Dumbledore and Gellert Grindelwald's duel in 1945, something that probably won't happen until Fantastic Beasts 5. In the meantime, audiences have Credence's story arc and the misadventures of Newt Scamander to keep them occupied, and there are a lot of misadventures. There's a lot going on, and Credence not being a Dumbledore opens up a few possible ideas. Maybe he finds out about Grindelwald's deception, loses his confidence in the Dark Wizard, and sets off on his own rage-filled path as an obscurial. This could also be an avenue for Queenie Goldstein, minus the obscurial part, to redeem herself, or for Jacob to somehow convince her to leave the dark side. Or Credence may even go to Albus for answers and support, switching sides and divulging information that helps take Grindelwald down. The most likely possibility is that the plot keeps unfolding as Credence remains in the dark, regarding Grindelwald's true motivations behind everything, and the story eventually spirals towards the truth. It'd certainly bring a darker inflection to Grindelwald, one that's perhaps necessary to raise the villain to becoming truly captivating. Audiences haven't gotten to know much of the Dark Wizard yet, and a two-faced relationship with Credence is a captivating way to develop his psyche in Fantastic Beasts 3. Unfortunately, it's doubtful it'll make Credence's life any easier, nor his outcome any cheerier as a prospect. Time will only tell if the Crimes of Grindelwald's biggest twist, in which Grindelwald reveals that Credence's name is actually Aurelius Dumbledore, will turn out to be true.
It is your birthright, my boy. As is the name I now restore to you. Aurelius Dumbledore. We will go down in history together as we remake this world.
giving audiences time to fully process the revelation before Fantastic Beasts 3 releases in 2020. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think that Credence is actually Aurelius Dumbledore? Or is Grindelwald just playing a manipulative game with his many pawns?